That's right. When you don't know.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
Know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles, welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver at caregiverdave.com, along with my lovely co-host, former mayor of a California beach town and best-selling author of The Happiest Corruption, Sleaze, Lies, and Suicide in a California beach town. Great reading, Debbie Peterson. And also coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on numerous syndicated radio and podcast networks, 26 global audio and video platforms, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio, and many, many more. We are proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, #2 on FeedSpot, #2 on caringvillage.com, and we have an especially exciting show planned for you today. We are talking to Richard Allen, who was born and raised in Liverpool, England. Mom and dad and sister Gillian had a life filled with kindness, humor, love, worked for some of the largest companies in the world, and moved to the USA in 2001. His father passed away in November 2020, and he's going to be talking to us about grief and the grief process. But before we get started, I do want to thank my last week's guest, epilepsy advocate and author of Vivian's Reign, My Daughter's Battle with Epilepsy. Mike Knox is a father and caregiver to a child who has drug-resistant epilepsy and is passionate about reducing the stigma surrounding epilepsy. And he's the developer of a brand, I don't know if it's a brand new machine, but it's a machine that helps, it's a device, I should say, that helps epilepsy get control over it. And just a reminder, you can watch or listen to that interview and all our interviews on our membership website, caregiverdave.com, or any of the other networks I mentioned earlier. All right, enough of that. Richard, so nice to have you on the Caregiver Dave Show.
Hey, Dave. Hey, Debbie. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And I always like to ask my guests just who is Richard Allen, Richard John Allen, and why was he placed on this earth?
I'd like to think I'm a gift from God. I think we all are, right?
We all are. Some more than others.
Yes, exactly. So I was born in Liverpool, England. Have obviously a mum and dad and my sister Gillian. Very traditional upbringing. You know, my dad worked 9 to 5 for the education in Liverpool. He actually worked in the town hall. He was a finance director. So he dealt with all the finances for all the different schools in the Liverpool district, and he worked in the town hall. So we were extremely proud of my dad. He was there for, I believe, 35 years. He retired when he was 52. Wow. Such a young age.
My wife had a stroke when she was 52. Wow.
Yeah.
It is a young age, yes.
Yes. And my mum stayed at home. So while my dad worked 9 to 5, my mum was at home looking after me and my sister Gillian. And it was, you know, if you know anything about Liverpool, it's a working class town. It's right on the northwest coast of England.
Well, I know the Beatles came from there.
The Beatles, that's right. Yes. I could tell you a story about them maybe another day. It's a cool story, but I've never met them, but my mum did back in the 60s. But anyway, but yeah, not many people there have got a lot of money. You know, like I say, it's a working class town, but Liverpool has a lot of sense of humor. The people there, there's a lot of comedians that come out of Liverpool. So my family was always happy. You know, we always had what we needed. My dad was a great provider. We never went without anything. And I think anybody can relate to the 60s and 70s, maybe even today. You always got hand-me-downs, right, from your uncles or cousins. And so I was always wearing, you know, jeans from my uncle or my cousin or something. It was, but yeah, always had what you needed, I guess is what I'm saying. So it was a wonderful life, wonderful upbringing.
What got you started in grief? I mean, because this is what you do. You wrote a book about grief, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, when did this passion come?
So it was kind of sad, but right now, as of today, I'm glad to be to be writing about grief. So back in February of 2020, my father sent me a text message. So I moved to America in 2001, as you said, and I would go over to Liverpool to see my family as much as I could. But in February 2020, my dad sent me a text message to tell me he had cancer.
Oh.
And he told me he was riddled with it. The doctors have said there's nothing they can do. He will die. They can put him on chemo, radiation, but it's not going to prevent it from happening. So, of course, myself and my fiance, Alison, we flew over to England straight away. It was actually early March of 2020 to see him. We spent a week there. And this was at the start of the pandemic. And we saw a few people in the airports wearing masks, and we thought that's kind of strange, because we didn't really know all this coronavirus then.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah. So we came back to America, and I wanted to go back as soon as I could. But in April, I think 2020 is when it really kicked in, and we had lockdowns, didn't we? And there was travel restrictions and travel bans, and I couldn't go back to see my dad. And thinking about it now, I think it kind of protected me in the sense of I didn't see my dad wither away, but at the same time, I wanted to be with him and to see him as much as I could. So I'm really conflicted as to whether it helped me or it didn't help me. But anyway, it was my sister that wrote to me in November 19th, 2020 to say, it's now, Richard, Dad's dying. And again, still being in the pandemic, I didn't know if I could get a flight, but I did. And the plane was empty. I took off from Raleigh, North Carolina, landed in London, and 3 of the terminals in London were closed. It was deserted. I got to Liverpool by train. It was deserted. It was a very surreal journey. And all this time I'm thinking to myself, Dave, is my dad still alive? Because it took 24 hours to get there. So I left on the Friday, November 19th. I get there on November 20th, 2020. And I ran into my dad's house, ran upstairs to the bedroom. And I couldn't believe what I saw. He was sitting up in bed watching TV, and he was watching a Clint Eastwood movie. He always wanted to be a cowboy. And I'm like, Dad, what's going on? You look great. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, why are you here? And I was so confused. And I climbed up on the bed, and I remember holding him, and he had his arms around me. And again, a very surreal experience. I felt like a little 5-year-old boy again. Having my dad's arms around me, I felt safe and protected. I always have. And it was a moment I'll never, ever forget. And we sat on the bed, talked for maybe an hour. And I went downstairs to have a cup of tea with my mum and sister while my dad rested for a little while. So this was on the Saturday. Well, on the Monday, my dad was gone.
Wow.
He deteriorated so fast.
But did he really look great when you saw him?
He did. He looked good, strong. He got up and went to the bathroom. He was eating his food, drinking his coffee.
Did he look great when he passed?
He slept a lot. What tended to happen was his body was shutting down. The nurses that were coming every 3 or 4 hours, they said his body is shutting down. So they warned us. They're experts, of course. They said, we can see the signs. Your dad's about to go.
He wasn't skin and bones like most cancer patients.
No,
like it's eating you alive inside.
No, he still looked quite good.
That's fortunate for you. You got a good image to remember him by.
Yeah.
Some of us don't have that gift.
No, and especially during the pandemic, maybe many people didn't even get there. But I was fortunate enough to be able to travel. And my fiance, she flew over shortly after, and she joined me over there after my dad had passed, and she was there for the funeral. But that whole experience was just real. Anyway, long story short was, again, because of the pandemic, we could not have the funeral straight away. So we had to wait 3 weeks for the funeral. So those 3 weeks I was there helping my mum and my sister with the grief and just being there to love and support each other.
Did you know how to help her with the grief? Obviously, you all were grieving. Did you even know that it was grief, that there is a grief process that, that deals with denial and bargaining and anger?
Yeah.
Did you tell us how you went through this process and what you
Sure.
learned and how you can teach the caregivers who are grieving right now, how you can help them. And if
So that's
Debbie,
a
if you have
great
anything you
question.
want to chime in, feel free.
So this was my first experience with grief, Dave and Debbie, because my grandparents
So this
died
was before the dog died.
before my dog died. Yes. So this was in the 2020, November 2020. And the first time I'd experienced grief, my grandparents all passed away when I was very young. So I hadn't, I can't think of another time I'd been to a funeral. I'd never experienced this before. So suddenly my dad passes away. He's the rock in my life. I went to him for advice on everything, and he's gone. And to hold his hand while he takes his last breath is such a dramatic experience. And I think how I got through it, for me, I got through it. Well, I'm saying I'm still going through it, really, is without knowing. It was the love of my family, being close to my mum, being close to my sister. As I mentioned before, we were an extremely close family. And I believe this has brought us even closer, which is hard to believe, but we're there for each other. And
it was okay to cry.
Yeah. And
cried on each other's shoulders.
Yeah. And I will say, and I'm sure your listeners know this, that grief is not only complex, but it's very individual. We all go through it so different. And
some people go through it quicker than other people.
Yeah. I mean, I remember it was really weird, Dave, because being at my mum's house and my dad's house, right, for those 3 weeks waiting for the funeral, I would get up in the morning, come downstairs to make a cup of coffee at breakfast. And my mum was in the kitchen and she'd be okay. But I break down crying. The next day I go downstairs to make a cup of coffee and my mum would break down crying. So it was just different times. We don't all cry or grieve the same. We don't do it in the same way or at the same time. So obviously when my mum was crying, I would console her, comfort her, and my sister. And when I was crying, they would do it for me. So as a family, and even extended family, like our aunties, uncles, and my fiance, when she came over, we were there for each other. And I think that is just one of the support tools or mechanisms that you can have. Certainly your family and closest friends can help you with grief, being there for you. And they don't have to, they don't have to give you a lot of advice. You don't have to share everything with them. Sometimes it's just simply being in company, being with them, and just talking about anything, whether it be about your loved one who's just left you or memories about, what you've been through in life with your loved one, with my dad.
Was anger one of the emotions that you had gone through? Just wondering. Or that your mother went through or your sister?
I personally haven't gone through the anger. Maybe I will, but not yet. I've not experienced the anger. I very quickly found myself with my faith, with religion, which is a surprise to me because as a boy growing up, I went to Catholic schools. I went to the school of St. John Bosco. I had some of my teachers were priests. I went to mass every day. I was an altar boy for many, many years. And at one point I went to seminary school thinking I was going to become a priest. So back in the day when I was 16, 17 and 18, I was consumed with religion. And then suddenly I wouldn't say it left me. I just went on a different path. And then my mum, unfortunately, had an aneurysm back in 2007. And I totally turned my back on religion and faith. I was angry. Why would...
Angry at God?
Angry at God. My mum and dad were the nicest people you could meet. So why would my mum have an aneurysm? And I was there. I witnessed her collapse. And she went into surgery in Connecticut. She was actually over here visiting. And she was in 9-hour surgery. Anyway, I was angry with God, angry with religion. But when my dad died, it was different, Dave. I leaned on my faith and it helped me a great deal.
Why do you think it was different?
I don't know. It's kind of, maybe it's because we're growing all the time, right? This was in 2007 when my mum had the aneurysm. It was 2020 when my dad passed away to cancer. Maybe I changed in some way. But I've always believed in God. I've always believed in heaven. I've always had the base of my faith has always been there. But for my mum, I was angry with my faith. But with my dad, as painful as it was to see him, and as painful as it was for me to carry his coffin into that church, I felt so much love from God, and from knowing that I know he will be okay. And maybe it's this, Dave, and you put me on the spot here, but I'm thinking about it now. Maybe it's because my mum is alive. Maybe she survived the aneurysm, and I was angry because of the suffering she went through. Whereas with my dad, he died and he's passed on. And now I know he's with the Lord, and I know he's at peace, and he communicates with me. I can tell you the signs I've had from my dad, unquestionably from my dad. And
so your mom is still alive?
My mum is still alive. Yeah, she's doing well. And like you say, what's that now? 16 years ago, 2007.
So did you get over that anger with God and your faith?
I did. Yes.
Good.
Took some time. Yeah, but I did.
How much time?
Hate to say it, a couple of years. I'm not going to lie. And
did she suffer for a couple of years?
She did. Yeah. It was kind of a disability for my mum. She lost partial sight. She couldn't drive a car anymore. She shakes a lot. You know, if she picks up a cup of tea, a hand will be shaking. You know,
Even today.
Yeah. So she's not 100%, of course. I mean, even the doctors.
She had a stroke, basically.
Yeah. The surgeon told us it's not the biggest aneurysm, but basically your mum should be dead. I don't know how she survived, but she did.
My wife had a stroke also. She lost her speech and the total right side paralysis.
Yeah.
But, she went through 3 years of grief. She had to reinvent herself and figured, well, if God still has me here, then he must have a purpose for me. So she just turned her life around, reinvented it. And she has a totally positive attitude and outlook. And she inspires people. People look at her and they say, what the heck am I complaining about? Look at this woman. She can't talk. She can't walk. She's got a smile on her face, joy in her heart. And so, it's all about perspective. And
we certainly get tested in life, like your wife, right? She was tested and she passed the test, right? Yeah. Just like my mum. My mum's always been religious and she goes to church every week and she's never lost her faith. I mean, when she came out of the surgery, she had no memory. She couldn't remember who we were. She couldn't remember my dad. I was here in America and my dad and my sister had to fly over to Connecticut and she couldn't remember who they were. And it took weeks and weeks before the memory came back.
Yeah, well, that's the difference between your mom and your dad. Your father really didn't suffer much. He just died quickly.
Yeah.
And that's the way I want to die, quickly.
Yeah. Yes.
Your mother went through a debilitating disability and, you had to watch it. And so that's the difference. That's why one gave you anger and one did not.
Yeah.
But you had to go through 3 griefs: the grief process of your father, your mother, and your dog, or not in that order. But that would make you an expert on grief. How can people, what can you teach people about going through the grief process? Because you can't cheat it. You got to go through it.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, to sum it up, I would say never give up. And as I've said before, and you know this, and Debbie knows this, like we said, grief is individual. So you have to find what works for you. What works for somebody else is great, but it may not work for you. Now, my latest book, Nature's Reach, I talk about nature and how nature has helped me and can help others with grief. Now, I'm not just saying that doctors, psychiatrists, counselors, and medication even cannot help us with grief, because it can, right? We know that. The medical science that's out there is phenomenal and it can help us with grief, but there's also natural ways that we can cope with grief. You've just simply got to find what works for you. Now, whether it's, it is seeing a doctor or joining a grief group, and there's many out there simply on Facebook, and you can chat with other people who are going through grief, and that can be very therapeutic to you. You can bond with people, make friends, and you can help each other in that way. It could be simple. Yes, sorry, Debbie.
I'm sorry. I was curious. I don't want to stop that thought, but when you're done with that thought, I'm really curious to know what what prompted you to write about it, to write the books? What happened that made you say, I've got to write these books?
And
Well, it wasn't me.
And what do you hope people will get out of it?
Well, it wasn't me. I'm going to blame my fiance, Alison. She's my best friend. And again, you know, as you go through life, you collect things. So when I lost my dad and we're waiting for the funeral, we were going to church. I was collecting the pamphlets. I was, you know, not just physical things, but memories, like family were stopping at the house to pass on the condolences and give us support. And I was just collecting things. And when we got back to America after the funeral, it was Alison, my fiance, who said, you know what, Rich, you should write a book about this. And I was like, no, I can't write. My English is horrible. And she's like, no, you can. Because I used to work for an insurance company over here, one of the largest in America, for 15 years. And I used to travel the country teaching classes. I was a commercial lines trainer. So I would go into a classroom of 50 people and give a class for several days. And Alison said, you can do this. You can communicate with people. You can write. It's like, no. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll give it a try. So I started to write and write and write. And then before I knew it, I had 9 chapters. And that was my first book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief. And that book talks about my journey of losing my dad, the initial shock of finding out he was going to pass away. But it also talks about some of the basics, like how to organize a funeral, how to write the eulogy, the obituary, how to cope with that grief, and the resources that are out there, and also about signs from our loved ones. I touch on that a little bit in that book too. So it's a complete guide, if you like, from, I wouldn't say start to finish, because I don't believe we get to that finish line. You just got to cope with the grief. And then my personal path was, okay, my dad's passed away. I know he's in heaven, but I want proof. Now, I know that could be contradictory to my faith, but I was getting signs from my dad, obvious signs. He was communicating with me, and I thought, this is really interesting. So I started to do research, and before you knew it, I'd written my second book called Life After This. And that talks about different civilizations, whether it's the Aztecs, the Romans, the Greeks, how they dealt with death and how they honored their loved ones. And then I talk about different religions, you know, whether it's the Latter-day Saints, whether it's Catholic, whether it's Jehovah's Witness. But then I talk about signs, what they can mean, and how we can communicate with our loved ones if we choose to do so, whether it's, you know, through prayer, through seance, through psychics. So I talk about that too in that book.
Give me an example of a sign.
Well, I'll give you one that happened to me just
two. Powerful one that happened for you.
Okay, the most powerful one, Dave. This only happened 2 weeks ago. So when my dad told me he was dying of cancer in February 2020, Alison and I flew over to England, to Liverpool, and we stayed in a hotel because I didn't want to crowd my dad's space in the house. And we were on the 4th floor of this hotel. And one night it was 2:00 in the morning, and I was up with Alison. We were just sitting there looking out of the window over the city centre. And on the street below us was a busker. I don't know if that's the word we use in America, actually. You know, somebody playing a guitar, singing songs. And he was playing Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, right? That song. Yeah. And there was some drunkard people there, and they were singing as well. And it was kind of cool. We were listening. And I started to cry. I don't know why, but if you listen to the lyrics, I don't know, it was very touching. And every time I hear that song now, Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, it reminds me of my dad. So 2 weeks ago, I go to bed. Alison comes to bed. We go to sleep. So I don't know about you, but I put my cell phone on the bedside table. I'm just going to get my phone. I get my cell phone, right? And I put it on the bedside table on the charge. And it's still on, but you know, it's quiet. Well, we're asleep. And at 1:16 p.m., my phone goes off and it starts playing Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond. Loud. And And I sat up in bed, and it may sound stupid, but I shouted, "Dad, Dad." And I looked around the bedroom and it's pitch black. And Alison sat up and the phone is still going. It's still playing. And it's the chorus. It's not even the start of the song. It's the chorus of Sweet Caroline. And I grabbed my cell phone, and my cell phone was unlocked. Now, you know, if you've got a cell phone, you lock it, you need your fingerprint or you type in a code to unlock it. Well, it was unlocked. I don't know how it unlocked. So I thought, well, maybe Pandora or Spotify is open and that's why it's playing that song. No, there was no app open on my phone. I'm a bit of paranoid. I always close the apps, right? So there was nothing open. I don't have that song in a playlist. It's not saved on my phone. It's simply
Totally unexplained, huh?
Yeah, it's not on my phone. Now you answer me or tell me, how could that song have played like that all by itself when my dad knows that every time I hear that song, I cry? Because I know it's that song. It's just weird.
Sounds like a sign to me. What do you think, Deb?
Oh, I agree. Yeah. I think electronics can be influenced by all kinds of energy that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
Recognize.
Yeah. Trying to help you get through the grief process, perhaps.
Yeah. It was just absolutely bizarre.
Thanks, Dad.
I know. Exactly. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, Dad.
Yeah.
You know,
in the last 4 minutes, time just flying here. Let's talk about your book and what you hope people will get out of is it 2 books?
3 books. Yeah. I've just finished the 4th book, which is for children.
Oh.
So
Talking
many
about
people
death and stuff.
Yeah, how children. Well, it's for children to read. It's a picture book, so it's only 600 words, and it's a very touching story, and it's very religious. I love these 3 books that I've written. Don't get me wrong. Each one is my journey and research that I've completed. But the children's book has such a great message. I cannot wait for the illustrator to finish with the pictures so I can publish it. But my first book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, is definitely a great guide for somebody who's about to lose a loved one or who has lost a loved one but needs help with their grief. It gives plenty of ideas on how to cope. I also talk about, like I say, about how to organize a funeral, the eulogy, how to read a will, all of those different things that you go through.
Practical stuff.
Yeah, I also talk about food, how food can help us, different foods we can eat that can
comfort food.
Yeah, well, to keep our blood sugars under control, and sugar's not good for us. We know this, but it can help us with our sleep as well, things like that. So food is important too, and exercise and such. Yeah.
What were you say, Deb?
So if people want to find out more about that or more about you, where would they do that? How would they do that?
Thanks, Debbie. So you can find my books on Amazon, and you can click on the author's name. I use my dad's name as my author name, John Allen. Or you can go to my website, which is richardjohnallen.com. And all my books are there. My podcasts are there. I have information there. You can contact me through the website too. I have press releases, all sorts of information there, and resources that can help anybody with grief.
Great. Debbie, how do we get a hold of you?
I am best reached at debbiepeterson.com, just my name.com. And there's all kinds of interesting things there too about how to interact with government to get them to understand what your needs are.
Great. Remember, all our shows become recorded pod and video casts on all your favorite platforms. And my website is caregiverdave.com. And on there, you'll see the latest book I wrote, Secrets from the Hammock, Uncommon Wisdom for Uncommon Times. You'll see all about the caregiver training, mastermind, and wellness retreats that I'm doing in Acapulco, Mexico. And if you join Caregiver Dave, the Facebook community of 34,000, you'll also get an online support group. So click the like or follow button on whatever platform you're watching this or listening to this interview on, and it helps us reach even more caregivers by improving Google's search engine algorithms. So again, Thank you, all my listeners out there all over the world, making us the #1 caregiver podcast on the internet. So until next week, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Debbie. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you, Richard.
And you too. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Dave Nasani, otherwise known as Caregiver Dave, and I'm coming to you live from this beautiful Acapulco villa, which I like to say is the perfect prescription for caregiver burnout. And I have a unique opportunity to bring 14 burned out caregivers up here so that they can decompress and do all the things that they need to do. But this is just a bonus. It actually comes with the 6-month Zoom coaching program. It's a one-on-one consult with me, Caregiver Dave, to identify where you are and where you need to go. It's 6 monthly small group coaching sessions to smash any obstacles between you and your ideal vision of what a caregiver needs to be and caregiver success. You get my 3 free books and instructions on boundaries, grief, self-care, organization, asking for help, learning how to say no, avoiding burnout, avoiding depression, avoiding perfectionism, avoiding isolation, avoiding resentment, delegation, team building, how to have fun, how to have no guilt, the importance of gratitude, and after caregiving when you're no longer a caregiver. But this 7-day bonus is absolutely free. It comes with the coaching program that you pay for. And the food is all inclusive. I'm telling you, 7 days and 7 nights here is amazing. This is truly paradise. And I highly recommend it. For more information, go to caregiverdave.com. That's going to send you to my other website. And if you want a shortcut to get there immediately, just go to acapulcodave.com. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you in Acapulco.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.